So this week's project turned into a much bigger effort than expected. My daughter wanted to replace her nightstand, and of course she wanted an epoxy river table. I've never done that before. Not a big fan, but we did that. So I ended up breaking this video into two parts. So the first part is building the walnut bottom, the legs, the drawers, the shelf, all the cabinetry, the joinery in there. And then the second part is the epoxy river table on the top, because that was a whole effort pouring it, flattening the slab. So I'm going to link both of them so that you can go between each one depending on which one you start with. So this is the first video. As I mentioned, we're going to be doing all the walnut. It's all walnut legs, laminate. There's a drawer, there's a shelf in between, and all the cabinetry, all the joinery and everything part of it. So this is some of the raw wood I started off with. This is actually the middle part. You can see what's going to be the tabletop, the river, and actually use this, got this specifically so they could cut this down the middle. So I just ended up trimming it just to start off, get to size. This is again going to be the middle piece, and I used some of the other pieces that don't have that quote-unquote defect down the middle to mark out the table. And actually had a little bit of twist on it, so I had to make a sled for it. Run it through the planer a couple times to get a flat surface before being able to make the other side parallel on it. It wasn't too bad, just a little bit of a twist. So I ran through that, made sure it was flat, and then edge jointed it as well before running it through the table saw, and then did this to all the pieces. And like I said, after I got the straight edge, the three sides, ran it through here, got the other side parallel so I could get it nice square. Got a new force table saw blade. It was very sharp, so when it says it's sharp, just even handling it, I actually cut myself. So now I started, once I got everything square, just kind of line it up, find the best pattern that I wanted. Just kind of like I worked a little bit on it. And here we are, starting to use the domino to connect all the pieces. Had a good helper here. Good inspection, yep. And just kind of demonstrating how they work. So we ran through all three pieces just for the top at the domino. Had some good hammering, just enough time to do a little bit of Macarena in between here. But of course, there was the favorite part was the smashing the dominoes in and the hammering. Last piece, we're just dry fitting here just to make sure it all works before the glue up. And a little bit more help here. So it worked, did some good team work here. I laid the glue, put the dominoes in. While she evened it out and got it nice and smooth here. So again, we're just working on the tabletop. And then put it in the clamps as usual. Took a lot here. I wanted to make sure I got it as smooth as possible. And here's where I actually took it and kind of following that line just so I could get a little bit of that pattern and use the bandsaw just to cut it out. We're making the river part here. See, made the last part of it and then actually able to open it up. So we're going to use this and then spread it out and get that little river. And of course, I have to go through here and get rid of all the dead, decaying wood in here. So anything that's loose, and also gives it a little bit of features here. And then just a little extra grinding here with a Dremel just to kind of get into the grooves and make sure I cleaned everything out. And then here's so I started working on the sides and the bottom, just enough time to cut myself again. This project was a lot of cutting myself here. So just the same way as doing the tops and just doing the sides. Dominoes in there just to kind of make sure they're flat. And then line it up. A lot of these pieces, or some of these pieces had a little bit of defects in them, so just kind of lined it up like that. You can see that knot on the side. And actually worked on it just a little bit just to try it out here, showing how you can use CA glue activator and slowly fill it in a couple times, sand it, and you can see it actually filled in that crack. It made it look like a nice little feature. And here it is after getting everything up. So that's the bottom, and then the two sides are able to glue them all up and just work on getting the structure set up. And he's going to use miters to attach the bottoms and the sides. So I used a track saw here to make a nice square miter, and then tested it out, just make sure it fits here. So you can see using the corner clamps just to kind of make sure it all lined up, and then just make sure during the gluing to make it a lot easier. Again, dominoes, I know everybody hates him. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people do. But he was able to get that all square. And then just kind of save money, but also kind of learn how to do veneering. They're making a shelf that goes in between here. You can see. So I'm going to use, I use plywood to do that, just to make the raw part of it. And then I got some walnut veneer, and I'm veneer the tops. And I have to inset it back because I want the drawer to be inset. And then also there I'm going to do edge banding like this. So just kind of want to lay it out. Of course, it's always fun to lay it out, see what it starts to look like. So this, you can see there's a shelf. The bottom part's going to be drawer. So I needed to use so I want the drawer top to be in there, whereas it's actually the shelf. And so use the router to bevel out because I don't want it to go all the way through to be visible. So it'd just be enough. And here's the shelf. So it's like I said, I got these walnut veneers, and I got them all lined up, squared out or square to each other, and then working on taping them together here just so you can get a nice tight fit. And then plenty of glue on the substrate and the plywood. So I'm going to get glue on there and then glue those veneers in. And what I've seen helps is to put glue in between the joints, and that'll just help kind of hold them together, and then close in any gaps. And I'm using a dark wood or dark glue, so it helps. And this may not be the official way to do it or the approved way, but just got a couple 100 pounds of weights and put it on here along with my panel clamps that I made. And then I had some of the particle board laminate that I used that to get a flat surface. And once I pulled it out, it looked really good. And then here's the dado that I made with the router. So getting ready to try it out. Just got a flush trim bit, and then use the plywood as the template to cut a nice edge on the veneer. So you can see it came out nice and perfect. I'd already sanded this down, and then the one side was a little bit longer, or the edges, so I just used the table saw with the kind of a sacrificial board on top, just to keep it from chipping out any. So now, once I got the frame working, I started working on the legs. I wanted to get like a little bit of a taper. I kind of drew it out, took a couple iterations of it, and then laid it out. I had some 8/4 walnut that I got, and so I'm going to use that for the leg material. So you see I kind of drew it on there, made sure the angles worked, and then found the best way that I could put as many of the pieces on there without wasting. So the first was just to make these legs, just make the straight cut to get, and I'm going to use the crosscut sled for the taper. And there was a little bit of an angle, I think it was like 8 degrees offset, so I used that to cut them down to shape. And then again, using this it's not really a tapering jig, but just the hold down clamps. I had the idea here that it would look like a POV view, but then it was shaking a little bit too much. But this is how I was able to get the taper on the legs. So I got all 4 of them, got a nice tapered cut on them. It was a lot safer using the crosscut sled than trying to hold it by hand and trying to put that through the table saw. And they all came out good. And then I wanted to be able to find out what the angle was, so I just used this inside compass tool to get the angle, so that I could, for that cross stringer piece, I wanted to cut that. So I ended up cutting that on the miter saw, and then started working on these stringers. Should have had my dust collection here, but I can see it just shooting right out into, luckily it's just out into the driveway. But after cutting that, got it all working, so I had these other cross pieces that I wanted to bevel them, just so it's flat on the top and then bevel on the sides. That's what you saw me doing here. And then just testing it out, the pieces laying on there, it all came out pretty good. So I decided to, of course, domino them, just because there were so many little pieces here, and then just there's all these angles, and just trying to get it perfect was going to be difficult. So I just used, I think it was a 5mm dominoes here. So I'm doing the stringer portion here, where I used 2 pieces, or sorry, 2 dominoes, one on the top, one on the bottom, and that gave me plenty of support. So there's the 2 pieces, and you can imagine how difficult this would be trying to put these together, glue them up, hold them all in without, I mean, you can use dowels as well. But here's the end piece of the stringer, so I'm doing the same thing. Doing one side, using that as the guide, flip it over, and then use that the other side. And here's the two dominoes in there, and then you can see them fitting into the leg piece that I put in there. And using that, just use that reference, the angle as the reference, you see. Lined up perfectly. Just a little bit of sanding to get it, but good enough for the gluing. And I actually used the pieces that I cut off for that taper, as I'm going to use them as cauls. You can see here. So it was quite a bit of doweling or joinery that I had to do here. So it helped. So here I'm using those offcuts, and I'm just going to use CA glue with the activator to act as a caul there, so I can have a nice square surface or 90 degrees on either side, so I'm not having to use a clamp on an angle and having it slide all over the place. So just super glue, CA glue on one side, activator on the other, push it in and it'll glue quickly, and then when I'm ready to take it out, just pull it off and then the tape comes right off. So again here, just using the domino joiners, and here you can see I put the caul on there on each side, so now I have a square surface and I can just nicely squeeze it down, and using it at a 90 degree either side. So I got a nice squeeze out there, so I know it's going to be solid. And then I wanted to round over each one of the edges just to give it a nice, little bit smoother, more modern look. It's going to be difficult to do it on the individual pieces, so I figured it would be a little bit easier to do it here once they kind of glue together. And then I have a leg that I was testing out, looking at the taper rounding, and I was just using that as to support the router. And I'm not going to round all of the edges because I still need to do the side joinery, the stringers. So I can do as much as I could here, both sides, interior side. You'll see later that towel's gone because I actually had a router mistake here where that got yanked up inside of there. And the router fell, and it actually took a chunk out of my piece of wood here. But anyways, now I got this side. I'll show that in a minute, the mistake. But so now I got those pieces together here, the side stringer, and I finished off the rounding of all the other edges. And I did this before I cleaned up the glue, just because I knew it's gonna make a little bit of mess, and I had to sand anyways. And here is where the router went into the edge. So cleaning it up a little bit here, or trying to fix this mistake so I didn't have to redo all of this. So I just used the chisel, kind of squared off the edge, and then I had some of that veneer that I used for a shelf left over, so that's what I'm trying to get it down to that 1/16 of an inch. Actually used two different pieces here. Well, so I used one piece just for the square part, and then later on I filled in that rounded area that you can see, but just kind of showing you how you're able to fix some mistakes like this. So I glued it in there, and once it dried off, again I used the brown wood or the brown glue just to kind of fix it better. You can see once it starts sanding it just almost starts to disappear. So once I fix that mistake, then I start working on the edge banding here for back to the shelf, kind of going all over the place. But I just use dominoes just to kind of line it up again, just and keep it from while I'm gluing or clamping it in, just so there's a little bit less movement. And I actually didn't show it, but I put a little bit of almost a rabbet on the edge there, where you can see where the plywood looks visible, but that's going to go into the dado that I created on the side, so that give it a nice hide the edge a little bit. And then here's the bottom of the bottom inside, and just starting to, now that I got everything worked out, the joinery set up, just went through it and sanded out this all. I started off with 80, then 120, 150. I think I did 180 in some places, but I'm using Rubio. Not now, but this is the mineral spirits just to kind of clean it off. And then one other piece I needed to work on was the back. So I created a rabbet in the back, so I'm just going to put 1/2 inch plywood on the back. So dadoed all around, kind of a dado rabbet. So you can see it's inset, so that once I put this 1/2 inch plywood in the back, I'm going to stain it and make it color match as best I can. It's in the back, so you don't really notice it. So I needed to glue together the miters, and so what I'm actually using is 45-degree cauls here. so that I can just have a nice 90-degree angle. And using CA glue and the activator, just again, you can see this makes a nice easy clamping surface instead of trying to do it with the tape and falling off. It creates a little bit of a mess, so I worked on that. I let that glue and then go back and finish. Since the legs are done, I went back, and this is where I'm actually doing the Rubio monocoat, just using the pure just to finish this off. And I'll show in a minute how, here it is, getting those cawls off. So the CA glue will stick a lot better to the veneer of the plywood than it does the hardwood. So I'm able to just use a chisel here, and it slowly falls off. And I wasn't actually putting the chisel onto the wood there. I was actually on the plywood. So it just kind of falls off, and it's left over with some little bit of CA glue, but just chisel it off real lightly. I'm just using just my fingertip. And there's almost nothing left over, so it creates a little bit of a mess, but makes the glue up a lot easier. So working on the drawer here, since I got all the major pieces, just a lot less here that I'm showing, because most people know how to make drawers, but just try to focus on the walnut portion of this build. So just kind of got it in there, made sure I had all the measurements correctly before I start gluing it together, put the slides in there. And then, as I saw, it's all working. I'm just going to glue it together and tack it in place. That's plenty. I had to square clamps in there just to make sure everything was at 90 degrees. And then got everything in there, so I put in the clamps, or sorry, the slides, and then I just use playing cards to get my 16th inch gap, and then just tested it out, make sure. Once I clamped on the front there, or actually screwed it into the drawer, got all my gaps right. And then this is there's another video where I actually show the making of this, but now I'm working on this tabletop with the river, but now I was actually working on how I was going to attach it, so I'm using those Z clamps. And then now I got everything drilled, everything cut out, I started putting it all together here. The shelf is actually finished already. That's why it looks different, but I figured it'd be easier to finish it off. But I got it all glued up here. And then I added these little supports on the top, so they have another place. You can see those little holes in there to attach the top. And then here's the back. So it sits flush inside of that. So got it all set up, all glued up, dried, sanded. Again, it went all the way up to 180, and I cleaned it all off, and then now I'm finishing the rest. So you can see the drawer, or the shelf in there is finished. So I'm just getting everything else. So using Rubio Monocoat Pure here, doing the sides, doing all the little edges, and then once it's sat on there for 5 minutes or so, take it all off. And then here is the finished product. And finally, you can see the grain just starting to pop out, which is always the great view. And then once that was all done, just worked on the drawer front as well. And then while that dried, I went back and then used a 23 gauge nailer just to put the backing in here. As I mentioned, so I used a little bit of 60 in some places that was really rough, but went from 60, 80, 120. So here's how I'd go sanding through the different grits. I actually do 220 on the top of the river, and then here is the kind of the final reveal. This is the great part when you finally get to see the epoxy that really shine through. You can see how it's kind of cloudy on the side, but once you get that filling in the clear, it really comes through. This is actually the bottom. You can see the bottom of the little fish we put in there, but just want to save the top for the final reveal here. Since I had to do this up to 220, I actually used the white pad to kind of really make sure get it into the grain. And here's the final put together, the top onto the base, and then I was going to use the ceramic coating just to give it a nice surface here. And here's the final product. So it turned out really good. I was really happy with it. It was kind of interesting. It was a lot of work putting the top on there, putting the veneering, getting the drawer in there, tapered legs. So it was a lot I had to work on. But it's obviously much improved of the drawer of the table that we're trying to replace. So you can see here's the top of it. You can see the sides. I love that back left corner where you can see the rings. And here you can actually see inside up through the epoxy, where we can see previously where you could see the underside of the fish. It's kind of interesting. And I added this brass handle onto the drawer, and then it here's slides out. Obviously you can see that poplar interior, and then we use soft close drawers or slides. So overall, great project. Have fun.